this moment, face into the wind. Northern places we may meet again.
I think Antarctica is probably, to this day, the most peaceful place I've been to. There's something otherworldly about it. It draws you in. The most important sentiment that I still hold within me from that experience was the sense of wonder about the world that I got to be a part of, the world that I get to be a part of today.
That's Malaika Vaz. She took part in the Antarctic and Arctic expeditions with Students on Ice as a teenager back in 2011 and 2012. She has gone on to do amazing things. From Goa in India, Malaika is a National Geographic Explorer, TV presenter, and a wildlife filmmaker, amongst many other things. She's a CEO and co-founder of Untamed Planet, an award-winning production house focused on wildlife and wildlife trafficking. As we record this, and this won't air until after this happens, but she just found out that she made the Forbes Magazine 30 Under 30 North America list of young entrepreneurs and innovators who are making an impact globally. I am really thrilled to have her as our guest on Greatest Classroom on Earth. 25 years of Students on Ice, inspiring youth at the ends of the earth. Hi, I'm Jeff Green, the founder and expedition leader of Students on Ice. In 1999, an idea was born. Imagine if we could bring youth at the beginning of their lives on educational expeditions to the polar regions, two cornerstones of the global ecosystem and windows to the world, and how that inspiring experience might shape their perspectives and even their futures.
Good morning, Students on Ice.
In December of 2000, we made our maiden ship voyage, bringing a group of youth on a journey to Antarctica. An incredible journey of discovery, connection, and learning in what we would later call the greatest classroom on Earth. It's hard to believe, but Students on Ice is now in its 25th year. Since that first expedition, we've taken more than 4,000 students to the Arctic and the Antarctic, together with teams of educators, elders, artists, researchers, and leaders from over 55 countries. Our mission to connect youth to nature, culture, environmental leadership and stewardship, and even to themselves has remained steady in this changing world. We now have a global network of incredible alumni doing incredible things. This podcast is part of a year-long celebration of Students on Ice, a chance to reflect on the experiences, the connections, and impacts through conversations with the people who were there, getting their stories in their own words. And I'm so excited to be joined now by 2011-2012 SOI alumna Malaika Vaz. Malaika, welcome.
Thank you, Jeff. It's a pleasure to be here.
So before we get started, Malaika, to get into the spirit of this, here's a clip of you at 15 years old on your Arctic expedition back in 2012.
I think all the friends that I've made, the memories, and I think that coming close to nature and experiencing it firsthand has given me a lot.
Oh my gosh.
What memories does that stir up for you?
Wow. That kind of transports you to another world. I remember what it was like to be there. I forgot what 13 or 14-year-old me sounded like, but she sounded happy in that moment and excited. And I think it was such a transformational experience, but to really be taken back to that moment has me having goosebumps right now, Jeff. That was so special. Thank you for sharing that with me. Honestly, I think that if I hadn't been on those expeditions, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today. And I, in many ways, wouldn't be the person I am today in ways. And it's just so special to remember where it all began.
Yeah, it's always good to look back, isn't it? And I want to do a bit of that today before we look too far forward. Well, maybe we should look forward first, because we had to reschedule this podcast interview 2 days ago because you had a bit of a last minute trip to make. Can you tell us about that? Why you're in New York right now?
Well, I live in New York, but I was actually back home in India because we're filming Red Pandas for a show that is coming out on television in the coming months. So that was an exciting project that we're just waiting for, and I'm going to be back in the jungle soon. But the reason I had to be in New York is because I got a surprise call from Forbes and found out that I'm on the 30 under 30 list for North America, which was an amazing surprise. I did not see that coming. And I only immigrated to the United States 3 years back. So it kind of feels like a hug from the US right now.
Wow. Well, congratulations. That is incredible. So proud of you
Thank you, Jeff. I
and so
appreciate
well deserved. And we're going to find out probably a bit about why you're being recognized um, in that way, which is so special. But let's step back a bit first. How did you first hear about Students on Ice and get involved?
As a little girl, I really just wanted to go to all 7 continents. It was a strange dream that I had from the time I was probably 3 or 4 years old, and I began to understand continents. So I grew up in Goa on the west coast of India. And I remember telling my mom and dad that I really wanted to go to the Antarctic and to Africa and to Asia. And for some reason, my parents were like, well, you don't have to start with going to Australia or to Europe. If you want to go to the Antarctic, there's probably ways to go there. So we began Googling it on the internet. And I remember going to the office of the National Center for Antarctic and Oceanographic Research with my parents and asking them about whether I could go on their expeditions. And I was 13 at the time. And they looked at me, laughed, and then very affectionately said that I was way too young to be going on a research expedition, but that there was a really cool program based out of Canada that was taking young people like me to the Arctic and the Antarctic. And they told me about Students on Ice, and it kind of seemed magical and like it didn't almost exist because it seemed like a dream for young people to go to these beautiful places and learn about what was happening and understand the science and research that was ongoing in these areas. So I immediately decided that I would love to go on these expeditions. And that's when we got in touch. And it just started off the most incredible journey. But yes, it did begin with me thinking that I could go on an adult 6-month long expedition to the Antarctic with research scientists from India. That didn't work out. Maybe if that had worked out, I might have been a scientist now. But I'm really glad that I went on the SOI expeditions and became a filmmaker.
Right, right. Well, that is so cool. I don't think I knew that whole story because we have had quite Students on Ice has had a relationship with India for many years. Of course, India is a signatory to the Antarctic Treaty. It has a major Antarctic research program, as you just mentioned. I went to India, I think in 2005 or six, to talk about Students on Ice. And in the process of that, the Indian poet Tishani Doshi came to Antarctica with us.
Wow.
And then because of her, there's there's a part in an Indian textbook about Students on Ice. And I don't know if you knew that or not, but like at the same time of year, every year, we get all these phone calls and emails from students in India saying, can I, because they read that chapter. But I think you were the first of the students from India to come with us.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. And I'm sure there's been so many more Indian students who've come in the years after, right?
There have been,
Yeah.
absolutely. Can you take us back to the moment you first arrived in, because you went to both the poles with us, but the first moment you arrived to Antarctica, what do you remember?
Well, I remember initially being really seasick as we went through the Drake's Passage. And then suddenly it was super quiet. I think Antarctica is probably to this day, the most peaceful place I've been to. There's something otherworldly about it. It draws you in. The most important sentiment that I still hold within me from that experience was the sense of wonder about the world that I got to be a part of, the world that I get to be a part of today. Remember, as we were coming up distinctly towards Deception Island, hearing about the history of the place, hearing about how whaling had affected the wildlife of the region, and spending time with scientists who were looking into that and studying whales today in the oceans. I think the experience of just understanding how much our oceans had gone through and how much resilience the oceans had seen in the years since really, really stayed with me. That silence, it was my first understanding of Antarctica, I'd say.
Yeah, it's got so many moods, doesn't it? And sometimes it is incredibly peaceful and silent, and sometimes it can be quite terrifying. That expedition was pretty special. I remember that one, and there were some legendary SOI participants. In fact, the fellow who probably greeted you on the beach in Deception Island was David Fletcher and told you the history of the whaling.
What a man.
He is an incredible guy. And Scoby Pie, and
Mhm.
oh my goodness, do you remember some of the
I
Scoby Pie
do.
stories?
And the guy who flew across with the small little plane, I'm forgetting his name, who flew with the geese?
Oh, yes, of course, Bill Lishman, Father Goose.
Bill Lishman. I remember hearing amazing stories.
Yeah, he's a legend in so many ways. Of course, the movie Fly Away Home was based on Bill's
Yeah.
life,
Mm.
teaching those geese to migrate. Unfortunately, we lost Bill a few years ago, but think about him a lot. You mentioned Deception Island. Did you happen to join the Antarctic swim team that day?
I did. Coming from super warm Goa on the west coast of India, where the ocean feels like bath water, to go into the frigid cold waters of Antarctica was definitely an experience. I remember dipping my toes in and being like, what am I doing? Why am I subjecting myself to torture like this? But I went in there, my brain froze, but thankfully we had the warm water outside that had been dug up waiting for us
That's
to
right.
get into. So, yeah, what an experience.
Yeah, you were not allowed to do that anymore, apparently. But
Oh,
for those listening that haven't been there, Deception Island is a semi-active volcano, and the geothermal activity on the beach where we landed is still happening. And we dig a hole, and it fills up with water, and the water heats up into like a hot tub. So it was kind of cheating, swimming, but cheating in
yeah.
Antarctica. Um, what other moments do you remember from your trip to Antarctica,
One of
Malaika?
my most distinct memories was seeing type B orca. I've been obsessed with orca. I feel like
Mm,
there is a species of animal that I feel represents my personality would definitely be an orca. They are team players. They're always hungry. They love the ocean. So when I saw this animal that I'd been obsessed with for so many years in the oceans and just saw them out on the deck of the icebreaker ship along with a couple of other students who were on the expedition, that was just such an incredible moment because it was just, we could see the waves and there was nothing. And then all of a sudden we saw this pod of orcas. Just such an incredible experience to have that happen in front of us. That was one of my most distinct memories. But another one that I remember was looking at the glaciers and looking at really old images that one of the staff members on the expedition had with them of that same glacier and seeing the difference from their time, about 25 years there, to my time there in 2011, and seeing just how much of a difference
mm,
climate change had made already. And I think that in,
mhm.
14 years since then, or the 13 years since then, that has only accelerated. I think those experiences of feeling and experiencing and understanding a place that meant so much to me as a young person, and also understanding the threats that this ecosystem and this region at large faced, really made me feel like I had purpose. Adventure always drew me in.
Mm.
I was someone who was always off, kind of a feral kid, always off on an adventure. But for the first time, I saw adults around me, explorers, scientists, oceanographers, historians, who were studying the oceans, who were going on these crazy adventures, but they meant something. And I think that for me, that was the most important experience of being on these expeditions, that you could go and see the
Mm.
world around you and you could savor the world around you, but you could also find ways to, make an impact and work with communities and work with the right organizations to make a difference.
And when you see those things like evidence of climate change, that's when those issues become real, don't they? Like you're not just reading about it, they become personal. What makes that work is it sort of touches you in the heart. Do you think that happened to you?
I think it did. And I feel like, we talk about this with storytelling often. It is about touching someone in the heart, giving them the science, and then giving them the tools to take action. That's what we endeavor to
Mm.
do with every documentary we make. And in a sense, the expeditions that you lead do that, Jeff, because you're touching people right where it matters. You're telling them the evidence and you're showing them the evidence, but you're also allowing young people to feel empowered, making people feel like they can actually be a part of the solution. And I think it's that trifecta that actually results in change. 4,000 students, 4,000 expeditioners, 25 years. I can't even imagine the kind of impact you and your team have been able to have in that time.
Well, it's hard to quantify, I guess, but we're this year coming up and doing these interviews is going to be a fun way of seeing some of that impact over time. And you've definitely had a lot of impact since that expedition, Malaika. We touched on it a little bit earlier in the interview here, but boy, what took you into the direction of filmmaking, and how is that, like, where do you really focus? What's your mission and vision there?
I would say I've always known that I wanted to tell stories. Probably from the time I was 5 years old, my hero on TV was David Attenborough, and I'd watched Steve Irwin and all of these legendary explorers and wish I could be doing cool things on TV like them as a kid. But when I turned 18, I was about to go to London to study political science and Eastern European economics, and I failed a math exam. So I had to take a gap year. And in that gap year, I realized you kind of remember the younger version of yourself that's not trying to get into academia. And the younger version of myself wanted to go do an internship at a production company. So I started off by working as a researcher and then a writer. And then I realized that I wanted to begin telling stories as a TV presenter. So I began with presenting for television, but quickly realized that I wanted to do more than just be the face of these stories. I wanted to work collaboratively with my team. And that's when I began directing. And in 2017, after a few years of working with different production companies and working with a range of different TV networks, I started my own production company along with my best friend and co-founder. It's called Untamed Planet, and our goal is to tell stories about how humans interact with the natural world. So that's what we've been doing since then. Our stories have ranged from documentaries about human-wildlife coexistence and conflict to wildlife trafficking, to climate change, to environmental equity, to human rights and beyond. And with each and every single film that we work on, our goal is to ensure that there is some kind of impact. That could be reaching out to millions of people on a mainstream television network like National Geographic, the BBC, or Apple TV. It could be working on something that is only viewed by a specific community in a specific location, like our recent film, which was in a conflict zone in Kashmir, where communities don't often have access to the wild. So we got a virtual reality film to them to help them see their own amazing backyard. It could be working collaboratively with policymakers and scientists to create policy change and protect the species that we document in our films, as we've done in the past with the film we made about manta ray trafficking across Asia. While the subjects keep changing every year.
Manta ray trafficking? People are trafficking manta rays?
Yeah, we made a film called Pang Yu Soy, which is a Chinese word for the soup that's derived from their pots, but there is a massive trade in their gill plates all across the world. They're used in traditional medicine, and people believe that by using it, you can detoxify your body. But actually, because these animals have bioaccumulation within their bodies, often when you have a manta, you will have high levels of lead and cadmium and lots of heavy metals in there. So it's incredibly damaging from a public health perspective. It's terrible, obviously, from an ecological perspective. But when you meet with the traders, they will say that it is a traditional belief. It is true in parts, but also by speaking to traditional Chinese medicine doctors, we realized that actually a lot of it is a business-driven demand. And for us as storytellers, really, it is about challenging the status quo, working collaboratively with communities, and telling these stories. So I think when I first started off, I began telling stories that were about subjects like wildlife trafficking or human-wildlife conflict. And I did that for a couple of years until I realized that there was a little bit of a problem. Not problem so much, but I needed to zoom out in terms of my approach. With a lot of our films, we were focusing on environmental criminals who made less than $5,000 a year sometimes. Obviously, the big criminal syndicates and the big organizations that are helming this make a lot of money from it, but the small-scale traffickers and fishermen and poachers don't. So in the last few years, we've shifted our focus to telling more stories about climate change, about the impact of industrial pollution on our planet.
And Malaika, so you and I saw each other in Canada recently when
That
you were
was
here
so
speaking
fun.
at a conference, and it was so good to see you. When we went for a nice swim in the Ottawa River at River House, but you were telling me like you're not just like you're putting yourself into some pretty risky situations to tell these stories, going undercover. And I think when most people meet you, they would not think you're doing that. That you're like, what is it like? What are you doing, and what drives you there? And are you afraid sometimes of what you're doing?
Well, when we're going undercover, it's often to obtain information that is otherwise incredibly difficult or impossible to get if you went in there with cameras. So that could be anything from interviewing criminal syndicate heads in remote parts of the world, or speaking to climate deniers sometimes. But even that, we've been doing it without going undercover, or investigating the impact of big corporations and human rights across the world. But in each of those situations, I'm driven by a mission. So even though there are safety concerns, I feel like that mission is really what draws me and my team in. As I get older, I'm more cognizant of the risks associated with this kind of work, and I make sure that my team.
You're still under 30, apparently, Malaika.
I love the adrenaline rush of,
You love that?
finishing the
Yeah.
story. Nothing makes me happier than almost killing myself. I'm joking, obviously, but I think it is about being on a quest, being on this mission, and trying to get information that helps to bring justice to the animals that you care so deeply about, or the people who are being affected by big environmental stories. So when we're there and when I'm scared, the first question I ask myself is, A, how do I keep ourselves safe? And if we can do that, the next question is, why are we doing this? And that question of why are we doing this often gives me the answer that keeps me going, even when it's hard, even when it's difficult. I've gotten death threats after our films have come out. We've had our films being banned. We've been followed by police. I've had the police come after us in many countries across the world. We've managed to get out of those situations because I work with incredibly talented teams. We work with amazing local communities who act as producers very often on the show. So we're doing this in a collaborative, intelligent, and nuanced way. But it is about that mission.
Do you see impacts from your films? Do you think they're really helping and making a difference?
Well, I think it's very easy as filmmakers to overstate the impact of our films sometimes. But I do think that, and I'm hard on myself, but I do think we've been able to have impact that can be tangibly measured. An example that I'd like to give you is a film we made with the BBC, which was called Planet Defenders. We documented the trade in elephants and how tourism, actually, which is fueled by very often Western interests, results in elephants being trafficked from the wild and kept in captivity. Elephants are such incredibly caring, loving, family-oriented animals that to keep them in captivity away from their families is really brutal. So we went in and filmed these beautiful elephants that had spent sometimes up to 30 years in captivity, and documented how there were incredible efforts underway to release them from captivity and to give them a second chance at life, a second chance to be elephants for the first time, really. And the most amazing part of that process was seeing these elephants really connect with each other at the release center and feel that sense of family again. The message that we were trying to convey in the film is that elephants and tigers and all of these other species that get trafficked for human beings to pet them and get that Instagram picture, or ride an elephant or take a selfie with the capuchin monkey, all of these animals belong in the wild. When the film came out on television, I had young people from across the world reach out to me and say that they had no idea that they thought that these animals were being rescued at these centers, and that the next time that they go on vacation, they're going to tell their family that they want to go on safari, or they want to go spend time in a place where animals can be seen in the wild naturally and not be a part of a very torturous process. That was an example, anecdotal, of course, of people from across the world reaching out and saying that their opinions were changed. I think behavioral change is really hard, but film has the ability to make that happen. Another example that we have is we worked in a film that resulted in scientists and policymakers coming together to get local policy listing for a species. The process is still underway, but we were able to get the first National Conservation Marine Initiative started because of this film. So that was a really exciting project. And then more recently, we've been working on a film with the Kashmir Forest Department that I mentioned briefly earlier, where we filmed with amazing animals in a war zone, in a place that has gone through so much conflict and insurgency and violence over the years, and worked to get community members access to that film. Very often when we make films, they go on television and they're only seen in the Western world just because of broadcast and the way that works. But we made sure that besides the broadcast version, our team also worked on a virtual reality film that brought the wild to them. And we had young people saying that after seeing the film, they wanted to go be a part of the forest department. They wanted to be scientists. They wanted to be, closer to nature in some way, even if that was going for a hike with their family on the weekends. So I think with each film, starting out with the question of what is the impact we want to have with this project is incredibly important. I'm grateful that my team and I are aligned about doing that every time.
And you're still just getting started. I can't wait to watch where it goes and how it grows. And your personal passion for this is so it's so important, but so I can feel it coming through the airwaves here, and that's what we need, isn't it? We need um, thousands, millions of people that feel that way, and your films are definitely planting seeds and inspiring young and old. So I really commend you on what you're doing, Malaika.
Thank you.
I want to just take another step back here because we talked about the Antarctic. I'd be remiss, of course, if we didn't talk about your Arctic experience, because that's actually where Students on Ice is spending most of our time these days. You were on the 2012 Arctic expedition, which was a bit of an epic, especially the way it started. Do you remember what happened?
It felt like we weren't going to get to the Arctic, Jeff, at that point. Do you remember how crazy that was?
Well, we were in the Arctic. We were in Iqaluit, but we were having a little trouble with the ice that year and getting to our ship.
Mm-hmm.
But
It
there was
was
some
an
good
adventure.
karma that
It was,
prevailed.
I think it was an adventure, but also looking back, seeing your calm was so impressive. Like, despite everything seemingly going wrong in that moment and a bunch of angsty young teenagers who wanted to get on a ship, you managed to keep us all excited and calm and engaged, and found a way to go to the place that we were meant to go to. And that was really special.
Yeah, well, like a duck. It might have seemed calm on the outside, but I think we were about to lose control, and then we got that phone call from the Canadian Coast Guard saying, "You've been approved for Coast Guard rescue." And the De Grossier, one of Canada's icebreakers, came in and picked all of us up and got us out through the ice out to the ship. I mean, it was an amazing moment. And I mentioned karma because 10 years earlier, Students on Ice had not rescued the De Grossier, but we helped the De Grossier get out of a situation up on Ellesmere Island.
Oh,
So
wow.
it was a bit of a full circle thing. And karma, I think good karma is always a part of Students on Ice expeditions that make them work. And yours was one of at the top of the list, I think.
Yeah.
But what else do you
100%.
remember about
A
your
lot of things.
Arctic experience? And I'm also like, whether it's Arctic or Antarctic, do you remember how those experiences maybe changed your relationship with nature?
I think growing up in India and watching a lot of environmental television, I saw nature as unpeopled. Even though I was growing up in a country with now upwards of 1 billion people, um, I just think that when we watch television, you see these beautiful landscapes and you see these incredible ecosystems, but you didn't often hear the stories of communities as much at that time. Even today, I'd say there's so much more work that we've got to do to make that happen. But going to the Arctic, I think, was especially significant because after going to the Antarctic, I really needed to see how communities interact with the natural world and feel connected and protected and understand how these large systems impact both people and nature. I think the experience of meeting amazing community members from across the Arctic and meeting incredibly important political leaders like Mary Simon as well made such a huge impact on me as a young person. I remember conversations on that expedition that talked about equity and talked about intergenerational equity and history and reparations. And I think that whether you're in India or whether you're in the Arctic, colonial forces, um, big industry, climate change, there's a similar threat multipliers that we're all experiencing in a very visceral way. And to see that up close and personal by meeting the people who had such a close connection and historical tie to the region made such a big difference. And I think what's really important about students and ice expeditions, when I look back at it now, is that they do not exist in a silo. There are so many expedition companies across the world who often reach out to me to be on their expeditions, and I say no. The reason is because they're taking people to beautiful places, dropping them there, and then taking them out. And there are no community members on those expeditions very often. With the Students and Ice expedition, not only were there experts and really accomplished older people who were there teaching us young people about that region, but there were also students who were learning about their own landscape in a unique and special and maybe different way than the way that they would think about it at home. To have people from the region, to have amazing Inuit friends who I'm still friends with now, and get to know their stories and hear from them firsthand, I think was really special. And it really represents the power of working outside of silos and having this immersive model in every way.
Yeah, that's sort of part of the magic, isn't it? Connecting youth from different parts of the world, different cultures, having global youth talking about global issues. Some of the big ones, like you've
Sure.
mentioned, climate change, but also some really regional and personal issues as well, mental health
Yeah,
and education. Um, Mary Simon was on your expedition. I
she
forgot about
was.
that, and we talked about Mary in our last interview on this podcast. Um, she's yeah, she's the best. And when you and Mary were on that expedition, we had quite a few Inuit youth as on the journey. But in the last 14 years, now the majority of youth on Students on Ice journeys are Indigenous
Oh,
youth, Inuit,
wow.
First Nations,
I
Métis,
didn't
and
know
so on.
that. That's
Yeah,
amazing
it's
stuff.
really
That's
evolved.
so cool.
Well, it's just been a natural evolution and the right evolution.
Yeah.
Um, and so who knows what the next 25 years will bring.
Yeah.
Um, but this has been so great chatting with you, Malaika. I wanted to ask you at least one more question, and we don't have to stop by any means because we could talk all day. But what do you see as your continuing journey?
Well, we've got a red panda shoot coming up, and we've got an ocean shoot, and we've got a couple of different projects in the next few months, and a series about sustainability that we're working on right now. But I'd like to zoom out a bit more, and I think share with you what the larger vision for my career in the next 10 years is. And obviously, these things keep changing, but you think you have a plan, and then life shows you a better plan sometimes. My goal right now is to build a very successful media production company that tells stories about the environment. I think very often we have this hipster disdain for popularity in the mainstream that takes away from environmental issues. And for me, my biggest goal is to take the environment and make it as mainstream as possible. It needs to be on primetime TV, it needs to be all across the world. People need to be encountering subjects about nature on an everyday basis. People who work in communities, people who work with policymakers, people who are policymakers, people who work at every level of the private sector and beyond. And I think storytelling has the ability to cut across political boundaries and divisions, bring us together, and help us to create an impact that actually will secure our future, not just for future generations, but for everyone who's alive on our planet today. So, yes, making nature mainstream is my big goal.
I think that's an absolutely amazing goal and vision, and it's so critical. Like, we have to, you're right, how do we get this mainstream? Clean air and clean water need to be priorities, don't they? The things that sustain life as we know it. And yet it's not. It's so counterintuitive and so
Mhm.
ridiculous that we don't value those things. So, boy, that's so great, Malika. And yeah, we all have our work cut out for us,
We do.
particularly in the US for the next few years.
Oh gosh, I think about that often. This is where our work matters most, I think. The election is terrifying,
Mm.
not just in this country, but beyond. But I think more importantly, it's a time where storytelling matters, where activism matters, where intelligent solutions matter. You're completely right. Clean air, water, and land matters more than anything. But I think we need a reframing. What often happens is that we see nature and conservation as an act of sacrifice. We see it as something that we should be doing because it is the right thing to do as humanity. But I think we need to position it as the most utilitarian thing to do. It is the most self interested thing that humanity can do. Looking after nature is not just great for pandas and tigers, but it's great for our economy. It's great for immigration policies. It's great for public health. It's great for every aspect of life that we care about. And I think by reframing that and bringing that to people in a way that actually resonates with them, we can help to change opinions and bring people onto the wild side.
You're an incredible ambassador for so many things, Malaika, including Students on Ice. Um, so thank you for all you've done. You've given back over the years. You were part of one of our very first alumni councils. Um, and that's what keeps things going, isn't it? Giving back like that. So thank you so much for that. And I've got a few more. I'm going to be reaching out to ask a few more favors in the months ahead. So look out. You've outlined that some of your next steps and goals. You didn't talk about the red pandas, so we might have to finish on that. But what gives you hope right now?
I'll give you a specific story because that's a very, very big question. And I like to answer big questions with very specific stories. A couple of months back, I was filming in Baton Rouge in Louisiana. It is an area, a region that's called Cancer Alley in the United States. It has some of the highest rates of cancer. And one of the reasons is it has some of the largest oil and gas plants in the US. So you have Exxon, Shell, Chevron that have set up camp there. And very often they've set up camp on land that was home to historically enslaved populations. So it is a historically tense region. It is a place that has so much amazing culture, but so much of, human health and ecological health has been taken away by big industry. When I was there, I met with this amazing group of women who have been impacted every single day by the industry in their backyard. A few of them even had cancer themselves, but they continued to fight back. They were about as old as my grandmother would be if she was alive today. And they are out there every single day working to speak to Congress, working with local communities, speaking to community members, school teachers, young people, and mobilizing their community to fight back against these environmental pressures. They've had incredible wins. They inspire me every single day. Miss Gail especially inspires me. But women like Miss Gail, who, despite going through so much personally, are able to find the resilience and the strength within themselves to fight back against these pressures, that's what keeps me going. I, as a filmmaker, have the privilege of their time. They open up their lives to us. They open up their worlds and their homes and tell us more about the incredible work that they're doing. And across all 7 continents, I've met people like her who have gone through so much and who are fighting back. And I think that's what gives me hope. Community members across the world, scientists, researchers, locals who care so deeply about our planet. All I can do is amplify those stories as a filmmaker, but they keep me going.
You are a great storyteller, and you're telling great stories, important stories. And I know that Miss Gail must be thrilled that she came in your path to tell her story. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming on The Greatest Classroom today. And by the way, congratulations once again on your most recent recognition, the 30 Under 30 by Forbes Magazine. Is there anything you'd like to add as a final comment today?
I'd just like to say that Students and Ice changed my life. I'm not just saying this because I'm on this podcast. I tell people this all the time. If I'd gone on some finance expedition, maybe I'd be working at a hedge fund right now. But I went on these amazing expeditions, and that changed the course of my entire life. It gave me a job that makes me excited about Mondays and fills my life with purpose every single moment of the day. It's led me on a career path that I feel like has just given me so much and has allowed me to connect with people and with ecosystems across the world. So I'm so grateful, Jeff, and I'm so happy that we're friends and we get to hang out and talk about those amazing memories and make new ones like we did in Ottawa recently.
The journey continues, doesn't it? This is just a little break to discuss where we've been so far and where you've been. So amazing, so proud of you.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon. And just to wrap up today, I want to thank the wonderful Sarah Harmer for our theme song, Lancaster Sound, or Talarutube Imanga, as it's known today. I also want to thank David McGuffin for all his behind-the-scenes magic, making this podcast come to life. If you enjoy this podcast, please give us a review and a rating where you listen, and share a link of this episode with Malaika, with family and friends and your networks. It's the best way to make sure that this conversation and others reach as wide an audience as possible and have the impact that we hope. To learn more about Students on Ice, go to soifoundation.org and give us a follow on social media. So thanks again so much for listening, everybody. Until next time, I'm Jeff Green. See you soon.
Feel this moment, face into the wind. Northern voices tell us where we've been. Feel this moment, face into the wind.